Life is full of unexpected twists and turns that can leave you bewildered and unprepared. It was a time like that for me. I took my time in the kitchen, enjoying my morning brew. Sitting in the living room, engrossed in his newspaper, Charles was as usual. I almost forgot there was anybody else in the house. He was that quiet. Year after year, same thing. Same uninterestedness. A younger, more enthusiastic me used to exist. But at this very moment, I was still a woman on the inside who sought excitement, even though Charles might not notice. His cold stares had begun to stifle the passion I felt inside. Who am I, though? Still, I felt like I might have life in me. Lost in contemplation, I raised the cup to my lips as these ideas raced through my mind. My hand dropped at that very moment. As the steaming coffee gushed down my chest, I mumbled an expletive and gasped for air. My heart skipped a beat as the scorching liquid pounded my flesh. Attempting to clean up the spill with a napkin was fruitless, so I reached for another tool. Even now, I can feel the fabric clinging to my skin. I felt the need to remove it. My fingers instinctively reached for the buttons of my shirt. They unraveled one by one. I felt a chill run down my spine as the chilly breeze caressed my exposed skin. I took off my shirt, tossed it across the kitchen counter, and began to wipe myself down in an attempt to clean up. My pulse was pounding, perhaps as a result of the abrupt exposure or the hot coffee. I got up and went out of the kitchen to get something new to wear. I would use the restroom to change. But my gaze landed on something as I neared the entrance. This is Danny's house. It's in the kitchen across the street from mine. My chest felt like it was going to explode at that very second. As I peered through the window, Danny stood there staring directly at me. We locked gazes. His expression changed from surprise to hesitant, and I could see it in his eyes. Suddenly, my breathing became labored. My body went through an odd sensation. Despite his lengthy period of solitude, Danny never failed to appear charming, well-groomed, and put together. After a few casual conversations, we discovered we had many interests. However, this unseen boundary separated us from the start. Then what? That line had seemingly disappeared. I averted my gaze and headed for the restroom in a flash. I felt a tangled web of anxious energy within. However, was it merely humiliation? Was it anything else entirely? We locked gazes. His eyes betrayed his surprise and momentary reluctance. I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. A peculiar tidal surge swept over me. Even though Danny had spent a lot of time alone, he never stopped looking after himself.
Presentable, charming.
After casual conversations, we discovered we shared many interests and values. However, a subtle boundary had always existed between us. Then what? It seemed as though the line had vanished altogether. Averting my gaze, I made my way to the restroom. A flutter of anxiousness fluttered within of me. However, was it merely humiliation? Was it anything else entirely? The moment I entered the house, I removed my shirt and threw it into the washing machine. I could still feel the coffee's warmth on my chest from when it had poured. However, that was not the source of my true annoyance. Looking into the mirror, I firmly grasped the edge of the sink. I appeared slightly bewildered, with slightly flushed cheeks. Why was I even up here? Rest assured, it was merely an accident. That strange sensation, though? How was I to put it to use? In an effort to dispel my confusion, I shook my head and stormed out of the restroom, making a beeline for my bedroom. I opened the closet and took an old shirt out of the stack. A white button-up that isn't quite as form-fitting as my previous one. Slowly but surely, I had broken the habit of always dressing too snugly. Now that I'm considering how tightly that old garment had gripped me, I'm beginning to wonder if I needed that sensation all over again. A beige cardigan and a knee-length skirt were my choices. The image of Danny's face kept popping into my head as I got dressed. You mean that expression? He had merely observed me from a distance. Could it have been embarrassment? Perhaps somewhat. Furthermore, there was an additional factor. Even when I zipped up my top, the inner struggle intensified. Will Charles be the one to hear about this? Is it safe to tell him? It seemed silly to tell my husband, who hadn't seen me in years, had grown distant, and had become invisible in my life. However, I secretly desired his response. I wished he'd experience some emotion, be envious, and lay claim to me. The choice was mine. I got out of bed and strode leisurely toward the living area. As always, Charles was deeply engrossed in his newspaper and hardly noticed that I was there. Because I felt like I didn't exist to him, I stopped making eye contact with him. Persisted despite an internal turmoil. Charles, I must tell you something, and I was about to say it when my mouth slipped. Someone started ringing the doorbell. Squirming, I kept my distance. Nodding his head, Charles remained still. Years of habit had taken their toll on his physique, and he fell further into the couch. Is that possible, Daisy? His voice was muted as he murmured. I turned toward the door, taking a big breath. Danny was standing there when I opened it. At that same second, there was complete stillness. Please subscribe and enable notifications before Danny completely changes the course of this narrative. I promise you, from beginning to end, you will not be able to take a breath. Also, feel free to leave a comment. Danny and I met eyes. There was an air of seriousness about the way he was observing me. It was as if he desired to examine what he had just saw through the glass in greater detail. No distractions. Considering carefully, Danny appeared much younger than his 58 years. The physique of a young man had become him. Into his demeanor, it was clear that he exercised. Having a wide chest, straight back, smooth sun-kissed skin. He sported dark-fitting slacks and a navy blue button-up shirt that was just a little bit loose at the collar. I would have thought he was 45 if I had looked at him like this. Where do I stand? I felt aged for one instant. However, I was also being watched. Danny kept staring for a while. He studied my neck, then my face, and finally the tiny gap in my shirt. What I had felt in the restroom earlier became crystal clear at that same moment. People were ignoring it. I felt a chill, but it was completely unsettling. At the very least, it revitalized me. From behind me, I heard Charles's voice yell out just as Danny was going to speak. I thought that was you, Danny? He raised his head and looked inside Danny. In contrast, I did nothing but stand there. Step right in, dude. Make this old guy feel a little younger, Charles said with a sluggish laugh. I caught Danny's attention again. At that same second, the sarcasm in Charles's words became crystal clear to us. Because being with him made me feel younger than my actual age. However, how risky was that sensation? I was utterly absorbed in another universe while Charles and Danny engaged in animated conversation in the living room. Without warning, I found myself stealing looks at Danny. To my surprise, though, he also caught my gaze on every occasion. This wasn't your average sidelong look either. Yes, he noticed me. Somehow I sensed it. He was more interested in seeing now than he was an hour ago. He was staring intently, drawing nearer. My emotions were whirled into a frenzy by that very notion. My eyes darted to Danny's face as Charles spoke. He nodded courteously, smirked slightly at the corner of his mouth, and looked attentive as he listened. However, an additional factor emerged. Seemed as though he was merely acting, having fun with it. He didn't seem to be here solely for Charles's benefit. And my whole being crumbled the second I had that realization. My intention was to initiate conversation. I wanted to say something at that very moment. Except that I was unable to. Simply put, he was just as guilty. All he did was gaze at me. For quite some time. Something about the expression seemed telling. As if one's patience were about to run dry. As if a tempest were brewing. I was unsure of my emotions at that very moment. To be sure, I was aware of one thing. By that point, the storm had become unstoppable. It felt like the day went on forever. Despite the passage of time, the knot in my stomach remained. The situation actually worsened. Upon returning to the living room in the evening, I saw Charles unconscious on the couch. I went unnoticed by him, completely unaffected by my presence. It couldn't have mattered less if I had been present. Yet Danny. It was Danny's observation. I also had no idea where that insight was going to take me. That night I hardly slept at all. My mind was in shambles. Every muscle in my body is twitching. However, concealed beneath it all, an eerie, unsettling excitement persisted. Stress wasn't the only factor. It went beyond that. Something I still didn't fully get. Everything seemed even heavier the following day. Charles rose, ate breakfast, and then departed, as is his normal pattern for a quiet morning. I remained oblivious to his destination. No, that was unnecessary. Oh, I was previously aware of that. David was accompanying him. This has always been the case for him. Plus, he hardly returned from his trips there. Who am I, though? Previously, I had sought out an alternative response. Danny had knocked on that door for what reason? Was seeing Charles truly the reason? Or was the goal to initiate a process? The house seemed deserted that day, without substance. The passage of time took an eternity. I felt an odd sense of unease as I stood by the kitchen window and stared outdoors. I was at a loss to describe it. Still, I could see it. My phone then started to ring. I glanced at the screen below. Hello, Danny. Very few words. Feel free to drop by. I suppressed a gasp. Reread it. Once again. I felt my pulse quicken. Feel free to drop by. I don't understand what that means. No justification. Just because. Only a formal invitation. Whether I should go was on my mind. I knew the answer, though, in my heart. A few hours later, at about 7 o'clock in the evening, I was standing outside his door. Within me, tempests are brewing. Danny was beaming with excitement as he opened the door. Also when it's dark. However, the moment I entered, the shock set in. The living room's lighting was low. I noticed it when my gaze shifted to the kitchen. The table was prepared, taking great care. For the sake of two. The aroma wafting out of the kitchen, too. The meal had been prepared by Danny. I remained motionless for a brief moment. In a frozen state. This is more than I anticipated. The strategy was already in his head. Coming closer, Danny stepped out of the kitchen. With 2 glasses in hand. His gaze met mine as he extended one to me. Thank you for attending. He spoke. His voice was calm and deep. Same as before. A sigh escaped my lips. My anxiety. How unexpected. That suffocating sensation within me, though, is the most important thing. I was shaken. This wasn't why I had come here. Yet here I am at this table. Along with Danny. With all the emotions he was evoking in me. It felt more genuine than before. While we dined, relaxing with a glass of wine, Danny spoke. Very interesting. Simple as pie. A storyteller he was. Laughed out loud. He never took his gaze off of me. Where do I stand? It seemed as if his universe was drawing me in. After that, the subject came back up again. Up to that point, the mishap with the coffee maker at home. My gaze fell upon him. He grinned at me in a subtle, knowing way. Enjoyed a little wine. After that, he looked directly into my eyes once more. I have a question for you, Daisy. He spoke. An unsettling, anxious flutter went through my body. What about that morning? His speech went on as before. I was staring at you the whole time and you saw. I grasped my wine glass. It was as if my hand was suddenly perspiring. Yeah, I had observed. Additionally, at this same moment, that forbidden moment in the kitchen was resurfacing for me. I tightened my hold on my glass slightly. I am overwhelmed by a whirlwind of feelings. At this very second, this evening, we arrived here in the blink of an eye. Danny and I met eyes. In that instant, some shame washed over me. I stated, a little quiver in my voice. But then, so you walked over to us. You had an inspiring look on your face that made me feel strong. Even then it wasn't sufficient. I received a mail from you. And now we have this meal. This discussion. I am requesting this focus. A complete shift has occurred. As for Danny, he remained silent. But I could see it in his gaze. A choice had been made by him. He carefully extended his hand across the table to grasp mine. Next, he drew me into the room's focal point. The man pushed a button. As the space was enlivened by a gentle tune. Cool jazz. Old. But evergreen. He stared straight into my eyes. Would you be so kind as to dance with me? I suppressed a gasp. A subtle nod was all I did. A hand from Danny rested on my waist, bringing me nearer. His body heat was palpable to me. As his fingers delicately ran over my spine, it hit me. I was shivering all over. It was a slow dance. Neat and steady. And risky. We stopped moving altogether at one point. We were merely drawing nearer. Next thing you know. He lowered his gaze to meet mine. We were both laughing and crying. That is how we remained, patiently awaiting, despite the fact that we were both aware of what was to come. Next thing I knew, Danny leaned in for a kiss. With one kiss, all the things I had been attempting to contain during the night were released. After the dance had ended, each of us was gasping for air. I felt Danny's hands on my waist and his on his chest. His heartbeat was palpable to me, and I could sense it to him. Nothing was able to stop us this time. To get a better look at him, I slightly raised my head. My inner blaze. I was unable to continue denying it. Unlike before, this one isn't a coffee accident, I stated. His eyes met me. At present, there is no physical barrier separating us. Minimal space. Even while my remarks lingered, then I delicately slipped my fingers toward my shirt's buttons. Upon removing the initial one, I observed that Danny was holding his breath. He was still staring at my waist as I undid the second one. On the third, I realized there was no turning back. My final doubt vanished as I continued to unbutton. Here I was. To the letter. My gaze fell upon him. I can't believe how youthful you seem, I stated. I have regained control of my voice. This newfound fiery self-assurance, on the other hand, flooded it. However, you're also incredibly powerful. You have an enormous frame. Very potent. No matter what, Danny kept staring at me. He grinned at me slightly. Nonetheless, a great deal more was concealed by it. Also you sound like a romantic, I went on. As I approached the final button, my fingers twitched. However, you're also really attractive. How captivating. With that sentence, it was as if the final barrier within me had dissolved. I gently removed my shirt from my shoulders and allowed it to cascade to one side. I felt a surge of warmth course through me as Danny's eyes remained fixed on mine. Afterwards, I fumbled with my skirt zipper, clearly visible to him. I lowered it gradually. After taking a long breath, I made my way to the couch and plopped down onto it. Danny kept staring after me. At this point, though, I could see clearly. There was absolutely no space between us tonight. Danny gently undressed, his gaze fixed on me the whole time. There was an air of self-assurance in every step. But the tempest brewing within him was palpable. I was on edge all over as he approached me, just as I had anticipated his arrival the whole time. He closed the distance between us by placing one knee beside my legs. He was now so near to my face, his gentle breath caressing my flesh. I felt his chest brush against mine. After that, he kissed me passionately. He planted a passionate, open and powerful kiss. Something inside of me was aroused. I was completely oblivious to everything else because of it. Somehow it made me feel entirely at home with him. It seemed as though he had assumed complete command. I looked up at him while we were in the midst of our kiss. He subtly parted his lips as he caught sight of the smile extending across my face. His voice was low and deep, almost a whisper, as he thanked Daisy for the compliments. I assure you, though, that is far from all there is to you. He trailed his fingertips down my waist. He yanked me tightly against him and then stopped. I was completely engulfed in his embrace. His power enveloping me. With my breathing all over the place, I cocked my head to the side. And me, he murmured, his lips gently brushing against mine. I longed for a closer encounter with this. There was a tremendous sensation within me at that same second. Danny, I squealed. This is so lovely, was the finishing touch. I am overwhelmed by the beauty of everything. You are very stunning. I seemed to be going on and on. It was as if someone were pulling my body up from the ceiling. I became increasingly disoriented as my body ascended. All the while I stared at Danny's corpse. After clinging to the couch fiercely, I released my grip. Meanwhile, I gently ran my hands down Danny's back after placing them on his shoulders. I don't feel alone anymore, Danny replied, his voice gasping for air. Tell him he's not alone, as I put my hands on his back and whispered to him. We are one. My voice was almost inaudible. Redness spread across my entire body. Still, I had to ask. Danny, how could a man of your stature ever feel lonely? My voice quivered, nearly quivering. Let it be said that I have finally found the appropriate person. That was Danny's simple statement, as his hair and body were soaked. I planted another kiss on his lips right then. I drew him nearer to my body by encircling his neck with my arms. I felt my knees stiffen and shake. You are well aware of my desires, I muttered into his ear. I quickly became aware of his massive frame. Embraced the freedom. He remained motionless for some time before rising to his feet and fixing his gaze on me. Rekindling my excitement was the sight of his massive, muscular physique standing before me. However, the point was not that. Excitement was not the point. Something shocking was going to come out of Danny's mouth and catch me entirely off guard. "Daisy, we're going," he announced. "We, the two of us. We won't spend the remainder of our lives apart and uninspired," he said after a little pause. "Everything is ready to go. In a little English village, far from Charles in the United States, in a cottage, what do you think?" My hands went up to my neck in an unconscious gesture. Danny took another look at my figure before fixing his gaze on mine, as if waiting for a response. I had already piqued his interest once more. I responded affirmatively. Moreover, I suggested that we leave without delay. "Danny, you mean the world to me. Please," I whispered, "let's go." Furthermore, we intended to depart in fact. Nevertheless, these clandestine gatherings were going to escalate in excitement until we ultimately managed to elude Charles. We quickly devised a plan for our initial escape. The event was scheduled for the next day. When I sneaked out, Charles was sound sleeping in bed. This is just the beginning. If you want to see what happens next, subscribe and follow my channel. Stay ahead of the curve with these stories by turning on alerts and leaving a comment. We greatly appreciate your support. Much obliged for your time up to this point.